This section of the textbook really lays the foundation for chemistry. Everything we do and see involves chemistry. In fact, the majority of our world is composed of less than 100 different types of atoms, and yet so much diversity exists. It's all about how are the individual atoms connected to each other in space. It's sort of like little Legos building up the whole world that we see. That's chemistry in a nutshell. Throughout this course, I want it to be so that you can look at the world, look at the things and the people around you, and have a little bit more of appreciation for what it is that creates the people, the world, the things around us. Anybody can utilize chemistry without really understanding it, but by understanding it a little bit better, you come to appreciate some of what's happening around you. For instance, I went to Puerto Rico. I had this wonderful opportunity to kayak in one of their bioluminescent bays, and it was amazing. I looked down, and when we'd kayak, our paddles would hit the water, the boat would hit the water, and it would just light up and glow. And then we'd look at the stars above us, and they're also on fire. And then there's fireflies, all these just beautiful displays of just this amazing chemistry happening all around us, and I love it. I'd hit the water, my hand would glow. I would see a fish swimming through the water, and what would happen is that fish would collide with these bioluminescent plankton, and the plankton would light up, making the fish seem even bigger than they were before. It was just beautiful, and my husband made fun of me because, I'm just so excited, but it was beautiful, and seeing the chemistry happening around us, it's all just gorgeous. And so at the very beginning, some of the people that laid the foundation that really allowed us to really think through and appreciate the chemistry that we see, because this bioluminescence is some really fun, complicated chemistry. But there's a whole process now that lets us figure out what's happening. Why are these bays glowing? Was it like the Spanish thought of Mosquito Bay, that it was, haunted, or there were spirits, or is there a real reason behind what we were seeing and we see even now today? So the people that laid the foundation for that were the alchemists. Now, the alchemists were really kind of our first chemists. They set the stage for modern chemistry. What they were trying to do was they were trying to look at two things. One, how can I turn everything that you see into gold? Because, people like to get rich. And secondly, an elixir of life, sort of like this Indiana Jones down here, the quest for the Holy Grail. It's something people have been wanting for years, and they still want it. But instead of just seeing this as a lofty goal and just trying 100 ways to get there, they really systematically studied, what can we do? And they would do experiments, and they would write it all down, and they would learn from their mistakes and keep going. And it's their process of systematically studying the world around them that laid the foundation for what chemists do now with the scientific method. Our textbook has this figure that they show to explain the scientific method. I think it's a little too clean. Science is really more like a web. It's interconnected. It's lopsided. You come up with a wonderful idea, then you test it, and then you do some more experiments, and then you look at the data and think, well, that was a harebrained idea, and you adjust your hypothesis, and you try something new. And there's just so much just trying and repeating and doing more that really makes science what it is today. People wouldn't be scientists without people around them and bouncing ideas off of, working together. That's really what science is all about. The scientific method is really a process that helps us get to better points in our understanding of the world around us. Now, the book does bring up a scientist by the name of Rachel Carson. So she was a biologist, and she was the first one that said, hey, the scientific method, we may be doing research that harms the environment in particular. So while most people were just concerned about the science, she was the first one that really threw up a flag and said, hey, the environment and humanity is really taking a back door to some of the science that's progressing. And so at the time, insects were being treated with DDT in particular, and other pesticides, and she was arguing that this was harming the fish, the bird population, and basically eventually all of humanity as well. But they tried, most of the media, most of the higher-ups, especially the government, tried to squelch a lot of her ideas because of the idea of, well, that would require regulations, that would require a lot of economic sacrifices, and so she was really kind of squelched. And so it wasn't until many, many years after this book was published, that of Silent Springs, before people really started realizing, hey, we have to pay attention to what we're doing as scientists. We need to be responsible researchers. And so whenever you're doing, thinking about what's going on around us, we we do have this critical thinking and validity flares that your textbook says. But basically, all of this is saying, think about claims and think about who's making them. Does it make sense that there might be some bias, or can it be studied and falsifiable, which means it could be shown, demonstrated that it could be true, or it could be proven false. It makes sense. It can be replicated, not just by that group that's running the experiment, but people all over the world. And is there enough evidence to really say, hey, yes, this is true? And so you have to look, whenever you're using your brain, try and think critically about everything. With that silent syrinx thing, does it make sense that the people that would benefit the most from using pesticides were the first critics of Rachel Carson's book? It does. And so just kind of using your brain is something that I hope you improve on this semester. Then there are other times where this idea of using your brain makes sense. So avoid confusing correlation with causation. So in this situation, we have deaths that are caused by falling down the stairs, and we can see that they've increased since 2007 to 2010, and iPhone sales also increased. So clearly, by people purchasing iPhones, we're causing people to fall down the stairs. Now, that seems kind of silly. There are a bunch of really funny, spurious correlations, like one that links like ice cream sales with murders or something, but there's a bunch of weird ones where you're like, well, of course those aren't related. But there are so many things in science that people want to say, this causes this. Vaccines cause autism. This causes this. There are lots of things that might be correlated, but not necessarily causation. So sure, you could fall down the stairs because you were playing on your iPhone, but more likely than not, this is just a blip in the graph where the deaths from falling down the stairs just increased naturally between these 3 years, and we might have looked at 2011 and saw they declined while iPhone sales continued to increase. So you have to kind of use your brain and think through what is causing what, and that's what the scientific method is trying to get you to achieve. Now, something the textbook brings about is, and I love this quote, that scientists strive for accuracy, not balance. And what that means is with the media, they will report an issue, and then they'll report that maybe, this side says this is true, this side says it is not, and they're really trying to be fair and give both sides a leg to stand on, or kind of represent both sides equally. Well, the problem is, say 99.9% of all scientists agree with one side of the issue, then by them presenting the other side and giving it equal airtime, it appears that it's actually 50-50 instead of 0.1% versus 99.9%. So it makes scientists look like they're arguing more when that may not be the case. All right, so when you're looking at these things, realize that scientists are trying to use the method to get truth, to understand what's happening, why it's happening, how it happens. Those are the big questions that scientists are working to solve on a day-to-day basis. Now, your textbook also tells you about George Washington Carver, and I love this story. So he was a research scientist, and look at those dates, 1864 to 1943. Those matter. He really worked on revitalizing the economy in the South with all of his applied research. So he was telling farmers how to rotate the crops. He worked on peanut butter. Some really neat stuff that he was able to do and accomplish in his time. But literally down the street, so I love the textbook includes this, but literally down the street, there was another set of studies that began taking place in 1932. So this study was done with the U.S. Public Health Service in collaboration, with Tuskegee University. And what was happening was this is called basic research, whereas George Washington Carver was called this applied research because he was trying to make a profit, help people make a profit. But basic research was trying to understand what's happening when a person gets syphilis. How does the disease progress through the course of a human? So that's a good question to ask, but this is an infamous experiment, which means it's not a good one. And the reason it's not a good one is because doctors began to use penicillin to treat infections starting as early as 1942. Look at those dates. 1932, it started. 42, 10 years later, they found penicillin. The problem is this study was not ended until 1972, which means for 30 years, these doctors had the medicine to treat people and make it so they were not dying horrible, horrible, painful deaths. And they just let them keep on suffering. And these were typically low-income minority people. And so they did not tell them about consent. They didn't tell them what was happening. They never told them about penicillin. For 30 years, hundreds of people died horrible, painful deaths. Obviously, if we look at the DQ for this study, benefits versus risks, there are no benefits to the study. the risks were huge. And so when you're looking at science, you not only have to keep in mind what are we trying to achieve, what are we trying to accomplish, but also your ethics behind it, because without ethics, there's no point to chemistry. And so really the humanities work hand in hand with the science to try and make it so that we can understand our world better. But when doing this, we have to remember to think about the benefits and the risks, and utmost think through the ethics that are taking place on any experiment. So that's what I thought was the most important parts of the first sections of this book. So now go ahead and go and read sections 1.5 and 1.6 and then come back for the next video.